right now, the resilience that is being shown by Ukrainian military, Ukrainian businesses is significant. That, as terrible and tragic as those attacks are, that businesses have learned to adapt and they are much more resilient for this situation.
Hi and welcome, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome you today to this meeting on resilience, wartime resilience in Ukraine projects of the American Chamber of Commerce with Dan Rice. We're a real special guest today. Dan is the president of the American University here in Kyiv, and I remember being at the opening right at the beautiful building on the river, on the Dnipro, last May. Dan is an accomplished entrepreneur, a fundraiser with an extremely strong background in leadership, strategic planning, marketing, and education. And Dan has served as a special advisor to General Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces. Dan is a former infantry officer for the US Army and a Purple Heart recipient, and has been active voice of speaking and writing about the war in Ukraine, advocating for additional weapon systems and exclusive access to senior leadership of both US and Ukrainian military leadership. And Dan, I think, who better to talk to about resilience than Dan? Dan has 3 master's degrees and is writing a doctoral thesis on uncertainty, if that's correct.
That's correct.
Dan, welcome. It's great to have you with us. How are you, and how have you been doing over the last this last period?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Andy, and thanks for all you and your team do. It's an honor to be here.
Okay. So Dan, what we want to focus on today, I mean, who better to ask than you, your expertise and experience writing about uncertainty. What is resilience during wartime? What is it for you?
So resilience, I believe, is built over time, and the more crises, the more interventions that don't break an individual or an institution typically make the institution or individual stronger. There are exceptions to that. But for the wartime situation within Ukraine, I believe that that the further things get along, the more organizations that survive tend to be stronger, more resilient. Just to give you an example, to get away from the wartime situation, but like you'd done your leadership in uncertainty series during COVID. COVID's a good example. For during COVID, companies, all organizations had to change. Some in drastic ways, some in minor. Depends on the business and what the focus was. But going through that crisis usually helped create a more resilient organization by learning new things, doing more Zoom communications than prior to COVID. And then when the crisis hit with the full-scale invasion in February 24th of 2022, those organizations were already more resilient to be prepared for that because they'd already adapted their organization. So I believe that even today's attacks on Kyiv, most cities in Europe that would destroy and throw off and throw. Right now, the resilience that is being shown by Ukrainian military, Ukrainian businesses is significant. That, as terrible and tragic as those attacks are, that businesses have learned to adapt and they are much more resilient for this situation. The one concern I would have is when there's 2 differences. There's post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think individuals and organizations can have that. And the disorder is the key to focus on. Everybody in Ukraine, I believe, has post-traumatic stress. But when it becomes a disorder, when you're losing sleep, when you start being dysfunctional, that's when you really need help.
Okay. That's a good difference. I never realized sort of differentiation. But so we're in the 3rd year of this full-scale war. I mean, we've had days like today when we've had hits over Kyiv. What has surprised you most during these last 2 years?
I think that everything goes in phases and it's up and down. It's a combination of factors. But I think that the stress levels that I've seen have become more significant as of the last couple of months for a number of reasons. The second anniversary of the full-scale invasion, I think, was stressful for people, realizing that it was going into a third year. People in Kyiv, I think, are more familiar with the U.S. Policy making than people in America. And everybody's following the supplemental and the fact that it's not getting through Congress yet. So I think people are very attuned to things that are very important for Ukraine. So I think the stress levels, the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin and the Russian disinformation, there's concern that the West would fragment. Personally, I don't see that. I think the West is becoming more resolved, albeit too slowly. It took too long. But I do think that people's stress levels in Ukraine that I've seen they are at a higher level than I saw at any time since I started working in Ukraine in May of 2022. So I do think the stress levels are high. I'm hopeful that some positive signs are going to help relieve those. So the war against the Russian Air Force right now is showing Ukraine taking down a lot of significant air assets. The naval war, I mean, you're seeing what, 7 ships since December go down, Russian ships. And so there's a lot of victories. There's a lot of concerns. The loss of Avdiivka is one of them, and then the supplemental. But I do think the West is really starting to show resolve. And hopefully when the supplemental gets approved and all those weapons start showing up, it not only supports the Ukraine armed forces, but it helps the Ukraine society because they're so together in this fight.
If there's one like key learning that you've seen that you can share during this war, what would that be?
I think attitude is everything from an individual standpoint to an organizational standpoint to a leadership standpoint. And I think that we've seen some spectacular leadership on the world stage from both General Zaluzhny and President Zelensky. I would say that, General Zaluzhny led the armed forces in an incredible way. He was, focused entirely on the armed forces, not on public relations. President Zelensky, surprised the world with his leadership and positively rallied the world. So I think leadership is the key. You didn't see that in 2014. I always like to point that out to people. Most of the world didn't really notice the invasion of Donbass or Crimea. It was a tragic, horrible violation of international sovereignty. But most people didn't notice it because the world didn't rally around Ukraine because of what Yanukovych left to go to Russia. So I think the leadership here has shown and has led the world to support Ukraine, and that should be recognized. And the same thing with what I'm seeing with the leadership from DTech and Brain and BGV Group. A lot of the investors in American University of Kyiv, their leadership is showing tremendous resilience and positive leadership through challenging and uncertain times.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I think as we approach, it's warming up in Kiev. I mean, the temperature outside, and we're going to get a bit more sun. And I think the building on the river, it's phenomenal. I think what you're doing in that building and your team, and we're very happy to be part of the AmCham, everything you do for our members in terms of the business school, and so that's really, really good. I mean, finally, any one message you would like to deliver both to the members or to audiences outside the country? I mean, what would that be?
Well, I've made 18 trips back and forth between America and Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. So I think I have a pulse on both in a unique perspective because I go meet with members of Congress and I meet with the Department of Defense at the Pentagon. I was just at the Pentagon 2 weeks ago. And so I'm seeing both sides of the situation. And I think sometimes the news all around the world can sometimes get things wrong. I would like the Ukrainian people to know the American people are firmly behind Ukraine. Like it is, I've never met anybody actually that isn't behind Ukraine. So it's caught up in Congress because a few fringe elements from both the left and the right are using legislation and policies to hold it up. But I believe it will be approved in a massive number. So we're typically approving like 300 million or 500 million approval packets, but this will be $61 billion. And the important thing there is it'll take us way past the U.S. elections and way past the new president coming in, whether it's Biden or Trump or somebody else. And so I do think that things will be much more certain, and the uncertainty will be removed as soon as that is approved. And I believe that'll be approved in the next couple of weeks, now that the U.S. has resolved the bigger federal government process. So I think once the U.S. approves that, I think the European nations have really come together like nobody would have ever expected, and the support is unanimous, and it's amazing. And I think that you're going to see a sea change in the support once the supplemental is approved and the weapons start shifting. And I hope that has a positive impact on the society of Ukraine, the attitude, the stress levels, reduces the stress levels, knows that you'll know that your troops are getting the best and the most equipment to fight this brave fight.
Well, brilliant. Well, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely thank you to Dan Rice, President of the American University Kyiv. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your true leadership. And I think, we very much look forward to reading your thesis on uncertainty, because I think it is something we do meet every day. So thank you. God
Thank
bless.
you,
Stay
Eddie.
safe, and together towards victory. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for all you do. Thanks. Bye-bye.